It's October 29th when I'm recording this. Like, we're cutting it close on this one. But I don't know. I started watching Northern Lion like a month ago, and I don't know if it's like through osmosis or like if it's just a thing that happens when you're a white guy who hits his mid-30s, but like I've been sick for this entire month. I like haven't had a voice properly. I've had like weird congestion issues. I'm blaming him. But nevertheless, we persist. This is the third Halloween since I started Rancher Rundown, and that means it's time to talk about the third and final spooky monster in Monster Rancher 2. There's 3 monsters you can only get in Monster Rancher 2 by having a monster die on your ranch, either through the glorious death of battle, or a monster that only lives for 1 week like Wracky Overview, or maybe you're just bad at following Colt's instructions. If there's one thing everyone agrees on about Monster Rancher 2, it's that it's always extremely easy to tell what you should be doing to keep your monster alive, and the best play is obvious every single time. That and Mochi is everyone's favorite monster. Today's monster is an easy unlock in the sense that just by playing the game normally and progressing you'll eventually unlock it, but it does require you to beat 2 of the major 4 tournaments, meaning that strictly through breeder rank, it's technically one of the most difficult main breeds to unlock. And like I mentioned earlier, you've also got to let a monster die before he shows up, so there's a couple of steps. But what's really spooky is that after I finished writing this script, I came back to it and realized this has actually been 4 Halloween since I started, since Joker was the first one I did.
Terrifying.
I don't know where the time goes, man. 38 monsters for the Rundown series might as well be 1,000. Feels like we're not even halfway there yet. But today we're talking about everyone's favorite little spooky man, Wracky. Its name is a transliteration of Lucky, which itself is a blatant Chucky reference, so its horror theme is not like tangentially related like it is with Mock, but it's specifically baked into its design philosophy. It's quite literally just a cursed doll, though the implications made by its card art mean that it's not a found artifact and it's a mass-produced toy. Are all Wracky dolls cursed intrinsically, or only like some of them given a soul? I think selling them in the toy store shelves, like this has got to be a crime of some sort if that's the case, which brings us to the thesis of today's video. The rights of monsters in the Monster Rancher universe. What rights do they have? Do they have rights? Let's find out. No, this art obviously, obviously to anyone not making speculative YouTube slop for clicks is, like lots of stuff in the Monster Rancher games, just silly for the sake of it. The games are endlessly anachronistic and full of plot holes and flavor that are not meant to be taken seriously. Or maybe they as a society have plastic available for packaging toys despite living in a time period that I'd bet dollars to donuts does not actually have widespread indoor plumbing. Maybe Santa is canon. Who knows? Who cares? Which brings us to our actual thesis of the video. Lore does not matter. Do games need writers? What does having writers accomplish? Let's find out. Honestly, the lore in Monster Rancher is really unimportant, though there's a pretty consistent canon of events throughout the games. But in a weird, like extended universe kind of way, the media that holds it all together isn't actually the mainline games, but rather the spin-offs, none of which Wracky is even in. Hop About happened in real life. Golem falling off this cliff was important to the story. Golem dies here. Monster Rancher is a really fascinating game in that its strength and appeal is explicitly in its mechanics and game feel. Maybe that's why I connect with it so strongly, because today's real thesis is, I do not know how to write. What is a script? How do you come up with ideas? Let's find out. Wracky is kind of a hard monster to properly assess. When he's on his A game, he's one of the strongest monsters in the entire game competitively, but he's got like what feels like a 50-50 shot to just throw any single game away. In the single player game, he's got one of the most bizarre stat distributions you can find. Obviously built for speed and intelligence, but he's got almost nothing else going for him. Not even skill. The unbelievably low starting life makes him difficult for new players to pilot early on, even if, the gain isn't too bad, and he can really struggle as a baby. But what makes this even more agonizing is that Wracky has the longest lifespan of any monster in the game, so he's stuck in the baby stage, and every subsequent stage, for a much longer time than you're probably used to. The long lifespan does wonders to patch up these holes in his stats, and it puts you on a much more forgiving clock to accomplish what you want with him, though if you're playing blind, this probably feels awful. Despite all these oddities, Wracky is a monster that is honestly lacking in struggles. Troron and Paradoxin patch up his skill and powers super easily, and the long lifespan almost seems purpose-built to allow it to excel at this type of drug training. This means that Wracky really only struggles with defense, which can easily be patched up with his best subbreed. Add in one of the fastest guts rates in the game and statistically Wracky wants for nothing. Wracky's real problem that stops him from being a top 4 monster in the entire game is that he is born with 1 power tech and 1 intelligence tech. The existence of basic techs in general is just a big minus for almost all intelligence builds in the game, and having to grab a subpar tech just to cover up a power tech is obviously not a great feeling. I didn't go into it too much with the Galley video, but this is a burden on him as well. But Wracky's placement of these techs and his options to cover them up are significantly weaker than Galley's. But despite this, Wracky's best techs are way stronger than those available to the already powerful Galley, so this is where that inconsistency comes in. Wracky is a monster of unbridled potential that's, well, bridled by being forced to have useless techs. He's a little bridled. Weapon is your run-of-the-mill, low-power, 10 force basic tech. Really accurate and absolutely worth its cost, but the relatively long animation means that on intelligence builds, stringing a few together can be instantly game-losing, and on power builds that can actually make use of it, it still doesn't really feel good to swing very much. Weapon throw is similar, but just better across the board. Faster animation, same withering, and it trades a small loss of accuracy for a nearly 50% additional force. Weapon throw is one of the absolute best basic techs in the game numerically, and that's before you even consider that it's on a monster with Wracky's guts rate. Wracky has a ton of techs on both sides, 24 in total, which is the most in the game, tied with Zoom and Arrowhead, and as we'll soon see, just like the monster himself, his techs can be wildly inconsistent. Weapon chains into weapon combo. It drops some accuracy and it doubles the damage, withering, and cost, which makes it technically worth what you pay for it, but weapon combo ends up being lackluster because of its position. In slot 1 it has a ton of competition, and you'll have a hell of a time convincing someone that combo is a better pickup than the others. Kick and its entire chain are also in slot 1. Kick is very expensive for 17 force, but the huge accuracy and decent withering on Wracky's guts rate makes it manageable. Kick is fine, but it would be a forgettable tech in Wracky's kit if it wasn't a prerequisite for the rest of its chain. Kick chains into Spin Kick, which is only marginally more expensive, but it cranks up the damage and withering in a big way. The only time Wracky wouldn't want to swing this is while down on guts versus a tank. Spin Kick is easily one of the best hit techs in the game and one of the defining techs in Wracky's kit. And Spin Kick chains into Twister Kick, a special tech and arguably the best and most important power tech available to Wracky. It's got a pretty unbelievable combo of damage and accuracy for its cost. This type of tech is usually reserved for monsters with a really bad resource generation, so it's a bit absurd that it was given to Wracky. Twister Kick feels really bad on a miss, as all techs at this cost level do, but the damage is high enough to be a solid swing into any opponent, and its consistency specifically allows Wracky to run either tank or speed builds to high levels of efficacy. Every power Wracky build gets Twister Kick. It's scary as hell. Punch is the last tech in slot 1. It's not incredible, and most of the time it's only picked up because of errors in building Wracky. It's got extremely low requirements to learn on errantry, which makes it a huge pain in the ass to collect his other heavy techs without it. Punch is ironically at its best in intelligence builds because it pushes Wracky really far out of slot 1. Since Wracky only has power techs in slot 1, being able to get out of dodge is important. Heavy Punch is probably a better use of your guts, but it still falls firmly into a pile of techs Wracky has that aren't particularly worth using. Most of Wracky's big damage techs have really low accuracy, so at least -7 isn't too bad. This ends up being a little bit more consistent if you're looking for damage, but it's still not a go-to option. Wracky combo is a pretty archetypical death final type all-in tech. Big damage and withering with awful hit for 50 guts. This is pretty risky all around, but obviously you're gambling on a nearly guaranteed win if it hits. Wracky has maybe better options if your goal is just high damage though. Spin Slash's main job is covering up weapon throw and power builds. It does a good chunk of damage, but it's not too reliable on -12 hit. Realistically, its value is in the utility of covering up a tech you never ever want to swing, more so than its actual numbers. Twister Slash is one of Wracky's strongest power techs. A little bit more damage and hit than Wracky combo, but it has almost no withering on it, so while it's less well-rounded as a nuke, it's cheap enough to not feel like a huge waste every time it's swung. It's almost identical to Dragon's flying combo, but the argument could be made that 25 guts on Dragon is a bigger investment than 39 on Wracky. Combined with Wracky's hit techs, this can be extremely powerful as a round opener if it hits, since the slot 1 techs are great for cleaning the game up later. Sneak attack is pretty funny. There's a few techs in the game that have solid critical hit chance but do so little damage that the extra crit is like negligible. You go from a D-Force tech to a D-Force tech. The hit percent and withering are honestly fine for 16 guts, but the base damage is lower than even weapon throw. At a max 39% chance to crit, this will only bring it up to 16 force, which, I mean, it's worth its value for sure at this point, but it's just such a weird cost proposition. The really long animation time for what's at best still just chip damage is useful for running down the clock more so than actually winning in a traditional way. Sneak attack chains into sneak combo, which is like... Dude, I don't know, man. This is such a horrendously bad tech. You can easily make a case for this being the absolute worst tech in the game, like the entire game. I tend to believe that techs like Pixie's Pat that just do really small damage and nothing else are worse generally because they can't really win games on their own, even if they're like relatively risk-free. Sneak attack still does like a little bit of damage. It's like comically overvalued at 42 cost for some reason, and like even on a crit you're only looking at 30 force, which almost feels like an error. And the 6-second animation time makes the 42 cost feel even worse than it normally does. 30 damage can be enough to win occasionally, but like... this tech does more mental damage to your opponent than it does actual damage to your opponent. But with Sneak Combo out of the way, I think this next tech is a pretty good example of how it can be kind of hard to assess the value of techs in Monster Rancher 2, because despite being on almost the exact same curve, Beat Dance doesn't get nearly the same amount of derision as Sneak Combo. Beat Dance is a tiny bit more damage and Withering for like 20% more guts. It's bad. I see arguments for the validity of this tech every now and then, and it's kind of like baffling to me. Numerically, it's similar to one of the techs widely considered to be in contention for worst in the entire game, and the fact that it's in slot 4 makes this probably even weaker. What's actually okay though, against all odds, is Curse Dance. This tech costs 55 guts, and there's only a few techs in the game that are even this expensive in the first place. On average, 55 guts techs are quite strong, but almost no monster in the game wants to spend this much on anything. Curse Dance might be the best example of a 55 cost tech being worth swinging over other options. 35 force, withering, and sharpness on a 50-50 shot to hit is pretty good. The 35 sharpness means that you can crank his crit all the way up to 55, meaning that more than half the time this is an S-force tech with huge withering. The cost also means it can't be swung on frame 1, so it gives Wracky an option for a game winner that he doesn't need to worry about using too early on in the match. Though Curse Dance is held back from being a really good option in Wracky's kit, not by anything it does or doesn't do, but rather by having Beat Dance as a prerequisite, which is a huge risk, since a lot of the times even on hit you're left in a losing position. Explosion is Wracky's final power tech, and after Golem's Cyclone, it is the absolute strongest tech in the game at an insane 70 force. It's stronger than like Dragon Combo. Of course, there's recoil of equal force attached to it, which is a bit of a damper, but it does win the game instantly, so it's got that going for it. Huge withering as well lowers the likelihood of grit procking, but minus 25 hit is so funny, man. It's just unbelievably inaccurate. And because of Wracky's fast guts rate, this often has only roughly 20-ish% chance to hit. It's an amazing anti-tank tech, but it's more of a funny gimmick than anything else. While most of Wracky's techs are power-based, he gets to make good use of his good intelligence gains with a ton of int techs as well. Just like its power hit techs, Wracky's intelligence hit techs are completely overtuned. Airshot doesn't do a lot of damage at all, but plus 22 hit on a tech that takes less than 2 seconds to animate is worth a lot more than you'd probably guess just by looking at the numbers. Hit percent definitely does have diminishing returns at a certain point, and Airshot is not too powerful to be unfair or anything like that, but its upgrade, Blast Shot, is insane. 10 extra cost for double the damage and some extra withering means it takes a tech that's already worth it, but maybe not always useful, and cranks up the numbers in a way that makes it a necessary pickup. Blast Shot is what makes Intelligence Wracky so strong, and not grabbing it is choosing to play a gimmicky build and miss out on its main strength. You can do whatever you want to when you're building, obviously, but I'm just giving you the facts. This is the best. Getting this is good. Not getting it is bad. Necromancy is an interesting tech in that it's pretty powerful in player versus player games, but when you're relying on AI to do its thing, 4 force is just not going to cut it. Might as well be 0. It's not a reliable tech at all, but it's got a niche use in giving your monster something to spend its guts on before it gets to slot 1, where it will undoubtedly swing weapon and punch. Necromancy has this fun glitch where the damage is dealt so late into the animation that if the monster is KO'd with it, they stay standing up, so people thought it was like, oh, this is done on purpose, like, you've animated the body, but no, it's just, maybe it was done on purpose, I don't know. I wasn't in the room. It used to be thought that this would stop your opponent from being able to use grit, but that's just not the case. Trick is insane withering for the cost, and just like Necromancy, unless you're controlling Wracky yourself, it's not going to win you any games. When we were doing PvP testing for Combo Breaker, I felt like Trick was like really particularly powerful, but the context of bad AI changes everything. It also covers weapon throw, which while admittedly less impactful on a single hit, is probably a better use of guts if swung down 3 times consecutively to match the cost. The rest of Wracky's intelligence techs are all special techs. Head Spike is not super great, but it's got pretty big withering on it. The damage is just really not efficient for the cost though. And while not unique for Wracky, Head Spike's long animation can make the cost feel even worse than it really is. It exists mostly as a prereq for the next tech in his chain. Fire Spike is a little less accurate, but gives sizable bumps to force and withering. This ends up being a decently powerful tech, maybe a bit above curve even. Compare this to Beat Dance and it really becomes apparent why that tech is so bad. Fire Spike is like a decidedly okay tech, and it still has significantly more force and withering. Flame is for all intents and purposes nearly identical to Wracky combo. Almost the exact same stat line for the same cost, and even the animation time is comparable. The only real issue is that minus 14 to hit in slot 4 is really scary. But since you're probably going to be picking up Blast Shot regardless, you can mitigate the chances of flame firing early. And Wracky's final tech is a crossover tech, Fire Juggler. This is only available to Draco Doll and is Wracky's highest force intelligence tech. Trading a bit of Withering in exchange for more damage over Flame, this tech is probably the reason you're running Draco Doll in the first place. Due to having that Dragon subtype, Draco doesn't have the same incredible guts regen of the other Wrackies, so you'll really feel that 50 guts cost. That said, 50 guts but 55 force,
55 burgers, 55 fries,
will definitely leave a mark. This is the strongest tech Wracky has access to after Explosion.
and 155 taters.
Metal Glade is the strongest available Wracky in the game given it has the fastest guts rate. There's not much more to it than that. Baby Doll has the same guts rate value, but it naturally can't learn Explosion for some reason, which is an obvious deal breaker, right? Like, you're gonna get Explosion. Wracky's power build has one main option, and it's whether or not to get Twister Slash. Spin Slash covers up Weapon Throw, and Twister Kick is necessary if your goal is to actually win. Everything else he has falls on a scale between superlative and completely game losing, so, pick your poison, or like, don't pick any poison at all. I've given you the antidote, the non-poison. Pick that. His intelligence build also relies on the high accuracy techs and maybe something like, I don't know, Fire Spike to threaten big damage. Mono attacking intelligence Wracky is pretty rare because of an inability to cover up slot 1 with an int tech. You end up relying on Punch for its movement, which feels bad regardless of how cheap it is. But that's all kind of moot, because where Wracky really shines is in formats where mixed attackers are not a statistical liability. The way competitive Monster Rancher works is that you're forced to keep your stats under a total stat cap. Investing in both power and intelligence bars you from being able to invest in your defensive stats more thoroughly, and is, without question, a limiting way to build your monster. So to let mixed attackers thrive, certain formats allow power and intelligence to be equal while only counting one of the two stats towards the cap. And this is Wracky's domain. With access to unrestrained power and intelligence stats, Wracky can make an extremely oppressive build by only picking up the Twister Kick and Blast Shot lines. This build is unbelievably accurate across the board, so it allows Wracky to forego maxing out his skill, which is, normally imperative if you're trying to make a good monster, in favor of putting more stats into life, or speed, or defense, become even tankier. If you're able to run even like 80% of the skill you normally would, you're able to make a monster that is way harder to kill than normal. It's very rare for monsters to build these minus skill builds and still perform well. They work best for the general monster population in low stat cap metas where people aren't able to run like an abundance of speed, but outside of that, only really Wracky and like maybe Worm have any continued success investing less in skill. And Wracky is like miles ahead of Worm. Wracky in the lightweight meta, which does not allow more than 500 in any given stat, can run extremely low skill and still reliably hit most of his moves. Versus tanks, 200 or even 100 skill is more than enough, and versus speed monsters, you're probably sitting at 30 to 40% chance to hit, which is pretty good when you only need 1 or 2 to connect to be declared the winner. An extra 300 points to throw into life, defense, or speed all make Wracky nigh unkillable in this format. It's kind of hard to overstate how strong he is. Wracky's among the ultra top tier lightweight mons, which is fitting, given his stature. He's built for this. The rest of the formats are admittedly hit or miss for him. Twister Kick is obviously very strong, but there's a chance he just blows all his guts on Weapon Throw. And the same is true on the intelligence side. Blast Shot is great to see your Wracky swing, but Punch and Weapon are very obviously not. I don't think there's a single monster in the game with a bigger delta of potential between how they perform in any given match. At least he's got lightweight to abuse his strengths though. Wracky was one of my favorite monsters growing up. I remember the first time I saw him, I didn't know he existed yet, and I was really surprised to see him show up after a monster died. I always loved the little serial nature of the card art too. I love the sets like this. I love his and I love Galley's, and we did them back to back, and that's pretty cool. And happy Halloween, I guess. On the 31st, which may be today, we'll be doing a charity stream for the Multiple Sclerosis Society of Canada, where I'm going to play through the top 4 Monster Rancher games start to finish. That's right, we're playing through Monster Rancher 1, we're playing through Monster Rancher 2, we're playing through Monster Rancher 3, and we're playing through Monkey Puncher. If you've never seen Monkey Puncher, then you're in for a treat. Or a trick. A trick or treat. Tis the season, I suppose. It's certainly something. I had someone, when we were watching the other day, be like, wow, it's so funny that you like pretend to love this game, and it's like, you're insane. This game is good as hell. There's no act. I'm a Monkey Puncher fan. I'm a Monkey Puncher truther. And thank you to everyone for the kind words and wishes about my Aunt Kathy on the last video. I can't think of a better way to honor her memory than with a big old charity stream, so I hope to see you all there. And just thank you again in general for watching and all the support over the years. Can't believe we've done 4 Halloweens already. That means that it's like been 5 years since my first video. I don't like watching the first video, man. I'm so sleepy. And why am I talking like this? Monster Rancher is a game for the PlayStation 1. Like, it's almost like a strong sad vibe. It makes me cringe so bad. I can't watch it. Do we redo it? Do I maybe do a voiceover, redo the thing? Because I think the video's okay, even though it's only 720p. I don't know. Maybe if we hit a goal on stream of donations, I'll redo the voiceover. And there you go, that's something. Anyway, I'll see you guys soon.
Look what you did, you rich little fuck!